Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and our friend Graham Fuller is back with us. Welcome back, Graham.
Thank you, Nima.
Graham, you were one of those guests who was hoping that Donald Trump would bring some sort of change to the Middle East. And when you see what's going on right now in the Middle East, what's your take on the way that Donald Trump is behaving?
Well, I would have to be honest and say that I'm a bit disappointed that there has been no obvious change. I emphasize that word obvious, no obvious change in the way Trump is approaching Middle East policy. It looks in many ways like it could be the same thing as Biden. But I think there may be some deeper differences. For one thing, I don't think that Trump likes to be manipulated by other people. He likes to manipulate. And of course, we know that Bibi Netanyahu is one of the great manipulators and has manipulated most American presidents for many decades. In fact, you might ask the question as to who, when it comes to the Middle East, who is the president? Is it Bibi Netanyahu or is it the American president? So, in one sense, I just have this feeling I can't absolutely demonstrate it that that Trump, I think, makes Bibi a little nervous. Bibi, I think, may sense that he is not quite as much in control as he was before. Bibi has the same mechanisms of the powerful Zionist lobby in the U.S., and that includes the American Congress and certainly control of a great deal of mainstream American media by and large. But I think Trump is, as we know, is a wild card. He's unpredictable. He's said, I think he's treated dealings with Netanyahu in not the normal ways. He's been rougher. He's been more unpredictable. He said things like America is going to take over Gaza. I mean, Israel expects that Gaza belongs to Israel. So when Trump talks about it belonging to that it's going to belong to America, there are a lot of things that I think maybe make Bibi uncomfortable. On top of that, I don't think Bibi senses that there is any deep personal loyalty on the part of Trump to Israel. Trump is transactional. He's going to ask, "What have you done for me today?" He's going to ask, "How are you serving my interests?" So it's less easy, I think, for Israel to feel completely in the driver's seat. Finally, I would probably, we're speculating here, but I would have to say that perhaps for Trump, Ukraine is the number one issue on the table right now. It is the one that threatens potential nuclear war more than any other thing. And in theory, is more soluble, if you will, is something that for which a solution can be found ultimately, much more even than the Arab Israeli or Palestinian Gaza Israeli situation. So maybe Trump is working on what he can, first of all. And if he has success within the area of Ukraine, Israel will have to take note. Bibi will have to take note. Trump will have gained further power in terms of his diplomatic maneuverings than he would have before he has proven himself. So these are just a few thoughts but so far I'd have to say I'm disappointed that he has not done more, but I think I understand why, whereas I'd never understood it with Biden or any of the people who preceded him.
So when you see the policy, considering what's going on between the United States and Yemen right now, he attacked Yemen again, the same policy of the Biden administration. And what is he going to achieve with Yemen? We know that the United States, together with with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar, all of them together were fighting Yemen for more than it was a decade. The war between the Saudis together with the United States with Yemenis, which didn't end well at the end of the day. but he tries to just resume that fight again. And what is he going to achieve? Is he does he really think that he's going to be different from what it was before?
Two things I think have changed in this situation. One is that the Houthis fairly recently, I mean, this was perhaps late in the Biden period, but fairly recently became involved in attempting to block shipping destined for Israel through the Red Sea. Before, that had not really been perhaps a deep part of the problem, and most of the war was Saudi driven, with American support more or less unconditional to Saudi Arabia for much of that. So I think that, and the second thing is that Trump very much views the Houthis as a stand-in, if you will, a substitute or a proxy for Iran. To the extent that he can maybe intimidate Houthis and Houthi actions, either militarily or diplomatically, in a sense, he is dealing with Iran. He's also openly said that anybody supporting the Houthis and all of these things will pay a very dear price if they continue with these policies. But it does, in a way, does rescue him from having to directly attack Iran or deal with Iran at this point directly, when he has a lot of other things on the table. And finally, poor Yemen. I lived there for 2 years. They're remarkable people, a very warm, generous people. Unlike their richer and more powerful Saudi neighbors, but they're desperately poor. But they're tough, they're proud, and I think it's quite amazing that they're willing to stand up to the United States when they have virtually no military capabilities, except maybe firing a lot of drones at shipping going to Israel through the Red Sea. So I think it's an easier target, if you will, to intimidate.
When Donald Trump says that anything that Yemenis do is because of Iran, do you think that Yemenis are getting orders from Iran? Do they really are they really under the thumb of the Iranian government to do whatever Iranian Iranians are asking them to do, or they have their sort of policy considering Gaza?
Well, I think I would not want to say that the Yemenis are simply, or the Houthis are simply puppets of Iran. Clearly, they have their own desire and very passionate feelings about this question. They also are an Arab power. The Houthis are perhaps observing the fact that in terms of actual action, very few Arab states have done anything at all to try to help the Palestinians. So I think there's some genuine sympathy for this. But obviously, the Houthis cannot act on their own. They cannot produce very many weapons on their own. So they would be somewhat dependent on Iran if they want to carry out even their own independent policies. So to the extent that Iran can support them militarily, yes, you would say that Iran has a lot of control over them. Iran could cut those military supplies off. But otherwise, I think they're doing it on their own. I mean, I think we need to think about Shia culture in general, and I think, Nima, you would have an appreciation for this in many ways. There is a strong sense, because the Shia were always the minority within Islam for many centuries, a sense that they were oppressed. That seems to be very much part of the culture. The dramas about the sufferings of the Ali, the the Caliph Ali, the last one. There's a lot of, I think, passion and a sense of suffering within Shiite culture somehow that we see in Iran as well. So maybe I think that's maybe why the Houthis are more ready to sense suffering in the region, in the area, than say Saudi Arabia or Egypt or even Jordan. I mean, these countries, those other countries I mentioned, have to be very careful because they cannot make enemies of the United States. They need the United States. Yemen probably feels it doesn't need the United States. It may feel it doesn't get very much out of it anyway. And they're expressing their more emotional, theatrical side in wanting to side with the Palestinian, which they feel a just Palestinian cause, and help break through, allow the Palestinians to get food, to get medicines or whatever supplies they need. So I think there's some ideological, emotional aspects at work here as well.
There was an interview, Graham, with Donald Trump on CNN, and here is what he said about Islam.
Is at war with the West?
I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred there. There's a tremendous hatred. We have to get to the bottom of it. There is an unbelievable hatred of us.
In Islam itself?
You're going to have to figure that out, okay? You'll get another Pulitzer, right? But you're going to have to figure that out. But there is a tremendous hatred, and we have to be very vigilant. We have to be very careful, and we can't allow people coming into this country who have this hatred of the United States.
I guess the question is,
and of people that are not Muslim.
I guess the question is there a war between the West and radical Islam, or is there a war between the West and Islam
It's
itself?
radical, but it's very hard to define. It's very hard to separate because you don't know who's who.
How do you respond to the question, the doubt that Donald Trump has?
Clearly, that is a very loaded question and a difficult question for Trump to answer. And Trump is not always the world's most polished diplomat. On the other hand, I think he is not utterly wrong in sensing that there is deep grievance within the Muslim world because of the history of the actions of the West, particularly the United States as the primary imperial power, if you will, over the past many decades. But there's a long association with European powers, starting with the British, who were the supreme practitioners of running and dominating Muslim countries. And then, of course, with the creation of Israel, the issue became far, far more intense. So I would have to say, I don't want to say hatred. I think from my experience in living in the Muslim world, there's been very considerable warmth. It's been more deep sorrow than it has been anything else. Why? They might turn the question around. They might say, why do you hate us? Why do you hate Islam? Why do you have no interest in the suffering of the Palestinians? Why do you support everything that Israel does against the Muslim world, but don't support us? So I think there's pain on the Muslim side as well, that they are not maybe fully respected. You have to remember that the U.S. now has been at war in several Muslim countries. I mean, the U.S. has been attacking Syria, trying to overthrow the Syrian regime for 30 or 40 years. It's much longer than the press normally talks about. There's Syria. They've been trying the war against Saddam Hussein. Yes, Saddam Hussein was a terrible leader, but nonetheless, I don't know the figures. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died in a very brutal war. There was the war in Afghanistan, and the U.S. has had very bad relations off and on with Pakistan on issues. So I think Muslims in many ways feel that they have been on the receiving end of this and often don't fully understand why they are not respected. and they, I think, have a sense that Islam may be not fully respected in the West as well. Certainly, when it is Israel and Zionism that is attempting to shape the perspective and understanding of Westerners of what Islam is all about. Every religion has its shortcomings, not as a faith as such, but as the way it is practiced, and by Muslim leaders and other things. But I think especially Zionist propaganda in the United States, which dominates American media. I don't know that Americans fully understand this, but it dominates the narrative for the most part in American media. That the image portrayed by Israel, even the talk during these recent wars, talking about animals and beneath, contempt and all of this kind of thing, we've been, I think, very much socialized into anti-Muslim feelings. So I think Trump is perhaps wrong to call it hatred. It's much more complicated than that. I think it includes a desire to actually be treated more on a par, on a level of equality than it is. But yes, there are deep emotional things at work that go even beyond Palestinians, go beyond the refugees from Palestinians, that go beyond the Arab world, that go beyond Israeli wars against the Arab world, that go beyond American invasion and attacks on Muslim countries. You go to Indonesia, and Indonesians are very upset at the treatment of Muslims as they see it, far, far away from Indonesia in the West. But nonetheless, it's Muslim culture, it's the Muslim world, and it's a very ancient culture with long history of bad experiences at the hands of Western imperialism, starting in particularly with the British.
Does Trump want peace, negotiations, or war with Iran so far? What's your understanding and what's your take on that?
I tend to feel that he does not want war. I tend to think Trump does not want war or like war in general. I think this has grown in his language over time. I think it was more on the why do they hate us kind of thing, when in his first administration he was going to block the arrival of Muslims from many other countries into the United States. But I think since then, the question of anti-war has grown in his mind. This is maybe perhaps one of the nicer sides of Trump that we see, since he's not always the nicest person in the world in his dealings with so many other kinds of issues and even minority issues. But no, I do not think Trump wants war. It would be costly. It would be dangerous. It would again stir up the Muslim world. It could easily spread beyond it. We have Chinese and Russian support now for some degree of Iran. It would be very dangerous for everybody, particularly given Bibi Netanyahu's desire to destroy any nuclear capabilities in Iran, and indeed to weaken Iran in any sense, because Bibi senses that Iran is potentially the greatest civilizational challenge, if you will. It's not just the Arab world, it's the determination of Iran, and maybe it's Shiite culture involved again, I don't know, but it senses the seriousness, the gravity of Iranian statecraft, which is very, very old and dangerous to become involved, to very dangerous to take on as an enemy.
What amazes me, Graham, when it comes to Iran is the way that the policymakers in the United States see Iran, and the political changes, internal political changes in Iran. It seems to me so simplistic. So it seems to me they don't understand what's going on in Iran. It's so simple. The leader decides about everything. They don't consider these political changes that are happening. There is an opportunity to talk with Iranians, and you have to put them in a better position to convince that we have the right and left, we have the people in the middle. There are many people in Iran, in the government, in the establishment, they don't want to talk with the United States. And the new government is willing to talk with the West. And it doesn't seem that this sort of reality being appreciated by the people who are making the decisions in the United States. Why is so simplistic? Is there anything to do with the government, or is the mindset of the establishment to think of Iran as a, I don't know, as a monarchy or something like that, which doesn't have anything to do with Iran, because I know Iran very well. I follow the internal policy of Iran. I understand the different layers of the government and how do they communicate to each other. But that would be appreciated. It doesn't seem that the Donald Trump and that the Trump administration understands that.
Nima, I don't think any U.S. administration understands that remotely. Forget about Iran. I'm not sure the United States really understands any deeper layers of politics within Russia, let's say, or within China. These are complicated states. So I'm not surprised that in a way Iran does not get close scrutiny. It may at the analytic level by some people, by some academics, maybe by some in CIA. I don't know. But it certainly doesn't figure prominently in that thinking. But more than that, you have to remember that the United States has been socialized for understandable reasons and not always understandable reasons to be hostile to Iran. We've talked about this before. I mean, the overthrow in what was the Middle East only genuine revolution, really, perhaps since going back to Abdel Nasser in Egypt, going back many, many decades. This was a genuine revolution, not a coup d'etat, some military guy stepping in and taking over. There was a popular revolution. You know better than I do. That overthrew the Shah in rage and anger and upset. The Shah was the United States' closest friend. So many of Iranians felt that the oppression by the Shah was directed by the United States. There was a lot of anger. That's probably all changed now and been forgotten. But the fact that the Shah was overthrown as the United States' single closest ally was never forgiven. And on top of that, when the Iranian young guards seized the American embassy and held American diplomats hostage for over a year and a half, that issue was in the paper every single day, and that has never been forgotten either. It was a humiliation for the United States. The United States does not forget humiliations. So once you get on the American shit list, you never get off it. It is very, very hard. Syria has been on the American shit list for a long time. Let's look at Cuba. Cuba has been on the American shit list now ever since the pro-American dictator was overthrown by Fidel Castro. How many years ago? 50 years ago. I can't even count. 60 years ago. It is still under embargo, still treated in economically and through sanctions very harshly. That goes back a long, long time. America does not readily forgive or forget.
Here is the tweet that Donald Trump, let me just, you see this tweet that Donald Trump did in 2019. It says that the going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made. We know that he was criticizing the war in Iraq, and Afghanistan. And right now, when you see the behavior of his administration in terms of Marco Rubio, here is Marco Rubio talking about that it seems that they don't have any sort of mindset, any sort of solution for the conflict that they have started with Houthis. Here is what Marco Rubio said.
Have these people controlling which ships can go through and which ones. We are not going to have these people controlling which ships can go through and which ones cannot. And so your question is, how long will this go on? It will go on until they no longer have the capability to do that.
Yeah. He's talking about the conflict between the United States and Yemenis. And this is the recipe for an endless war in the Middle East, in the Red Sea, between the United States and Yemenis. I don't know if Yemenis would run out of ammunitions, weapons, because it's unbelievable. If they go in the same direction that we've seen with the Biden administration, what would be the solution? Are they gonna stay there? Are they gonna fight Yemenis while Israel is attacking Gazans?
I don't know the answer to it. I don't know. I think only the intelligence agencies would have correct information as to the kind of weapons, drones, etc., that the Houthis have, and how readily they can create or manufacture their own drones. I don't know. But I would think that Yemeni capabilities are finite, and that in effect, if the United States carries out an unceasing campaign against already dirt poor Yemen, that the Houthis will fairly soon literally run out of ammunition. The other question, though, I think is a more serious one in terms of the international perspective. Yemen is functionally blocking passage through the Red Sea, which in international framework is not acceptable. You can say, well, it's limited to only ships that are going to Israel. The fact is, it is blocking international waterway, major international waterway, coming from the Indian Ocean up towards the Mediterranean. So I think the United States is fairly well justified. I don't want to say I support all of it, but I think it's seemingly legally justified in carrying out actions against those states that are trying to block free passage through the Red Sea. I don't know. As I said earlier, I think this may be a warning blow against Iran. I think I've quoted before the Chinese proverb that you kill the chicken to scare the monkey. If you scare the Houthis and show enough damage to them, Iran may decide that it's simply too dangerous. They don't want to get involved. But it is tragic, and it's amazing. I never ever would have expected that this would have been the kind of response that we see, and we see other Arab states sitting around with their hands in their pockets or their clothing, unsure of what to do. But they are certainly not taking action in support of the Palestinian cause that seems to be so important to Muslims.
Are they going to join the United States against Yemenis?
Who?
Arab states.
I doubt it.
Saudi Arabia, UAE.
I think the Yemenis have probably won a great deal of respect in the Arab world for what they have done. I think most Arabs might feel that it's foolish and ultimately unproductive, that the Yemenis will not be able to change the facts on the ground. But I think there is great admiration, especially given the poverty of the country as a whole, and its gutsiness, its seeming bravery in standing up for what they believe is a very serious moral issue on the welfare of the Palestinian people. Even I'm sure in Indonesia, there would be admiration. By the way, Yemenis, there's quite a large Yemeni diaspora, and there would be many Yemenis, who would be, they've traveled far and wide over many hundreds of years. There would be many in places like Indonesia or Malaysia, certainly in Pakistan and elsewhere, who would are known elements to local Muslims, which would increase the emotional sensitivity, the emotional sympathies for Muslims in faraway Muslim countries with what the Houthis are doing to try to help the Palestinians.
We had the second phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and it lasted 2.5 hours, and it seems that the outcome was they agreed on ceasefire, but when it comes to the conditions that Vladimir Putin is putting on the table, I don't know if Donald Trump would be able to convince Zelensky. Do you think that would be a step forward? Is that going to facilitate the situation with Zelensky, or we're going to still have the same sort of problem that we had with Ukraine?
First of all, as you know, there was no general ceasefire. There was a discussion about what a ceasefire would look like, and so far it has been limited to the issues of power capabilities, energy supplies within Ukraine. So this is really just a first step. Some critics say, oh, well, this is nothing. It doesn't matter that much. There's a deeper problem. Of course, there are deeper problems. There's the deeper problem of why this war ever started at all, which was the United States pushing NATO right up to the borders of Russia. But so I think it's a small but very symbolic, important first step. And frankly, I don't want to be crude about it, but I don't know whether it matters whether Zelensky cares or doesn't care. We've seen Trump speak fairly bluntly with Zelensky in the White House. I think if Zelensky has problems, I'm not sure that the United States will pay much attention to that when it comes. If it will, I doubt that Washington will allow Zelensky to stand in the way of a serious solution to the Ukraine problem. I'm sure that the Ukrainians will not get a good deal out of this whole thing. It's sad. The Ukrainians have been the primary victims of this entire war that the United States really provoked in the first place, and Washington has proudly proclaimed that we will fight to the end. Well, basically, that means fighting to the last Yemeni, but the Yemenis are paying the price for this economically, in terms of manpower, casualties, destruction of infrastructure, blah, blah, all of these things. So now at this point, I don't think that Trump is going to allow Zelensky to block a serious opening for a true settlement in the region. And as you know, it's not just about ceasefire, and it's not just about local issues or on the ground or even territory. Fundamentally, the bottom line is Ukraine should not and will not join NATO. That has been clear in Russian language going back 20 years at least. So there are big things going on here. I doubt that the Europeans are going to be able to stop this. The British in particular are working very hard to block this, any kind of peaceful settlement. But the British have always been deep hatred in England for Russia going back hundreds of years, and imperial rivalry. So other than that, I don't think the Europeans are going to be able to do very much about this. I'm sure that and if Europe is now being asked or asking itself to pay for this war, which they didn't even want to pay what Trump asked them or what even Biden asked them to pay before as their share of NATO things. Can we really believe that the Europeans are going to pay for pay with the really serious money that's involved? I think there was a meeting recently, just yesterday or the day before, in which the Italians and others expressed certain doubts about how much deep money they wanted to put into this. Does Europe want to pay for deep nuclearization? I don't know. That's a very good question. But Europe is beginning to realize that this is deeply costly to Europe, this whole war. If Ukraine was the first victim, I would say Europe is the second victim with its huge economic blows, its loss of energy supplies from Russia, its unrest now, social unrest within the EU that is growing. This was clear in the last EU elections that the newer people in the German Bundestag and others are not the same crowd as was there before. They're less anti-war. I think Europe's position on this is all very weak. And Nima, I would just mention one other thing here too. I think Europe is slowly beginning to realize that when you say, oh, well, we're getting the NATO and the US is protecting us, first of all, protecting us from what? I doubt that very many Europeans truly believe that Russia is going to be attacking Europe proper, and Ukraine was never part of that game. But secondly, the part of the deal of working with the United States and NATO is that you have to buy into all of America's imperial projects. It's not just Ukraine. It's other projects. You have to go to Iraq, or you have to go to Afghanistan, which Canada said, no, we're not going to go to Afghanistan, even as part of NATO. And then there's talk of NATO East, which would try to bring together to hitch up all these various countries that are nervous about China and pull them together and into an anti-Chinese military grouping, which I doubt it will happen. But I don't think the Europeans believed or understood early on that this is what they were signing on to, an eternal UP struggle to maintain its own hegemony in the name of NATO. There's going to be deep rethinking of all of this. I think every week we see more and more rethoughts of what this all means and where Europe will go now.
You mentioned in terms of nuclear weapons that the Europeans wants to increase their nuclear bombs, and as we saw, Macron was talking about it. Do you think that the United States will let them to go after nuclear bombs and making new ones and increasing the number of bombs that they're gonna have? I don't know if they want to fight with Russia by 2030, and this is so insane when you look at the way that they're talking about the fight with Russia. We have to defend ourselves. We have to fight Russia, but is the United States comfortable with the sort of mindset that they're having right now in terms of nuclear weapons?
I can't believe that it is comfortable. On the other hand, and I think Europe early on, it was under Charles de Gaulle back after the end of World War II, who decided that France was going to get its own nuclear weapons, its force de frappe, as it calls a striking force, nuclear striking force, all of its own. And of course, with the British, the United States can never deny the British anything when it comes to issues like that. But I sense some, it depends on the administration. I don't know what the thinking is inside of the Pentagon. But further, if Europe becomes more independent on a nuclear basis, on the one hand, you can argue, well, at least they have the responsibility for this. We don't want to have to be responsible if Europe can take care of itself. But secondly, you can argue that the United States sees it is losing some degree of strategic control over what European strategic policies are. And the more independent Europe becomes, the less control over those policies Washington has. I don't know how that's going to work out. There are complicated trade-offs on the issue. Also, nuclear weapons are very expensive, require a lot of maintenance. I don't know that Europe again is ready to want to pay for all of this. France would like Europe to pay for France's nuclear force de frappe, but I'm not sure Europe wants to do that. I hate to say it, but I think there are some slight, tiny residual memories, maybe within Europe, about two wars fighting with Germany and Italy and France and England and all of this to make maybe Europeans nervous about other countries becoming nuclear. Do they want Germany to become a nuclear power? Why not, in one sense? But there are just these concerns and slight suspicions of the intent of other European powers towards each other.
As you mentioned, it's so unbelievable if they go after nuclear bombs. But do you see the role of the British government in making these sort of rhetorics in Europe in order to put pressure on Trump and his administration? Or it's coming from the French government or German government?
That's a very good question. I don't know how much the German government has been involved in this. And as I say, I think Germany knows that it is under special scrutiny since it has been involved. I don't want to say responsible for World War I, but certainly for World War II. Germany has to move very cautiously. But I don't think I think Europe does not know yet where it wants to go, and it may feel that it's able to put further pressure on Trump, on the Pentagon, if it decides to go more independently. But as I say, there may be those who will argue that that nuclear weapons controlled by Europe, it will help support the peace in Europe. I'm not comfortable with that argument, but there are those who argue that proliferation, that assured mutual destruction has prevented wars from taking place between the Soviet Union and the US, between China and the US, between Pakistan and India, for that matter, over a considerable period of time. That argument makes me uncomfortable that the more nukes, the better. It's a worrisome argument, but there are those who make that case. I don't know where Washington will go on this.
If we had the Biden administration in Washington, I would say that the Biden administration is trying to force Europeans to talk this way. But when we don't have the Biden administration, it's Donald Trump. And he's totally against this sort of attitude on the part of Europeans toward the war in Ukraine. But the question is, who's running the show in Europe? Who's making these rhetorics? Who's more influential, let's put it that way, in Europe in terms of influencing the policies in Ukraine, in your opinion? Which country is in that position?
Don't ask me impossible questions. I think that's a very, very, very valid question and a very important question. If right off the top of my head, I would have to say Britain. Britain has been the most outspoken pro-war party. actually for a very, very, very long time. It has been Britain who that has attempted to manipulate. Britain views itself as the European brain and viewed America as the muscles, the brawn. So the British brain will direct American brawn and muscles to do the things that Britain no longer can do, that it used to be able to do when it was running the world through the British Empire. So I think Britain still basically wants to feel that it is directing this, manipulating it, helping guide it, and being a partner, a lapdog, as somebody once said of America, but that of Britain. But that's a little unfair. But yeah, Britain. It was Boris Johnson who went and killed the first Istanbul agreement between Russia and Ukraine 2 years back. So the rhetoric out of Britain is still the most powerful of all. And Britain, of course, feels that it's never really been part of Europe. It's a very mixed feeling about who they are and where they are. And there's some rival between Britain and France that goes back many, many hundreds of years. Thank God it doesn't involve anything military anymore remotely, but there's sort of a cultural rivalry between these two powers. So I think the French are reluctant to see Britain take the absolute leading role in all of the situation. Macron would like his nuclear weapons to be the ones that matter, perhaps more than just British ones. Otherwise, I would say, who is driving European policy? To me, the highly important turning point in European and NATO policies when Eastern European powers were brought into NATO. And when you have a country, I don't want to be unkind to them because they live in a very difficult situation, but countries like Estonia, which now directs European foreign policy with Kallas as I don't know her official title, but she's in charge of European policy. She is fiercely, ferociously anti-Russian. She's Estonian. I don't blame Estonians. They have reason to be nervous. If you live next to Russia over for a long time, you are nervous about Russia. Canadians and Mexicans are nervous about America, not in the same sense, but small countries next to big countries are always nervous. So I think between the Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians and Poles, and the Poles have been involved in war with Russia off and on for hundreds and hundreds of years. These are the four countries in particular that are driving fear of Russia and a call to build up European power, even if it raises tensions in the area. They don't trust Russia, maybe justifiably, maybe not, but they do not want peace in the area. And don't want NATO to sign on to that. So I would say first Britain, and secondly, the three Baltic powers and Poland are driving the more military side of this war.
It seemed that the desperation of the British government is because considering getting out of the European Union and feeling that you're much closer to the United States than other countries in Europe, and Donald Trump comes to power in the United States, he simply doesn't care about the United Kingdom. He wants his sort of agenda. They're so desperate when they see they're not part of the European Union. Their main ally, the United States, is not caring about them, even talking about Canada the way that Donald Trump is talking about Canada being part of the United States. It's also disappointing for the British government. That could be the main reason they're just trying to do everything to fight the United States in terms of the new policies of the Trump administration in Ukraine.
I think you are absolutely right, Naima, about that. That's why I consider the UK to be the single most dangerous force in Western Europe, which has the deep anti-Russian instincts going back hundreds of years, and has the military capabilities and the diplomatic skills, but the military and even nuclear capabilities that give it particular clout. I don't know how easily this will die in the UK. But I sense that there will be certainly more rivalry emerging, more visibly emerging between UK, France, and Germany on where the future of European foreign policy will go. I suspect there are going to be a lot of tensions in that regard as well. Certainly not involving military. The Europe finally has maybe learned its lesson, but this is not necessarily a completely happy family. And they are now under great stress as to what is their future. Where do they go? I had suggested that if they might even, it's very unlikely, but in a new world order in which the BRICS become increasingly the more and more powerful economic center of the world, that a country, especially like the UK, which is traded with very distant countries for a very long time, it might find itself working more closely with the BRICS. That would be terrific. I think it would bring Europe into a greater role than perhaps it will have now all by itself. I mean, if you look at the map, Nima, and you look at this massive Eurasian continent, and then this tiny little European tail at the end. Well, where will that little tail go? It used to be able to wag the world, the world of the dog of the world. But now that's no longer really true. So maybe their future does lie in some kind of closer relationship with a new world order, which I and many other people think is beginning slowly to emerge. That might give them some new capabilities and it could bring a great deal to BRICS. The problem is, in general, Europe is suffering from its imperial colonial legacy, and that is not quickly forgotten, and it's deep in the minds of most people in the global South.
And usually Europeans think that, at least I'm not talking about the people, the leaders, they feel that they're so smart when it comes to the policy, foreign policy. But we know that other countries like Singapore, Indonesia, they're feeling the change that is happening that you mentioned in terms of BRICS. They're trying to find some sort of bargaining position for them to be in between the United States and BRICS to find a better deal for them. But you don't see that coming from the European countries. It's so unfortunate to see that.
I think Europe is still in denial about the emergence of these black and brown people who they used to dominate and control through British imperialism, and now are emerging more strongly than ever. Don't forget that Europe was humiliating and going to war with China, trying to force China to buy British opium. Going back a century or two ago, the Opium War. It was a very humiliating thing, and morally, can you imagine the UK trying to force China to accept opium from outside the country? I mean, these things don't go away very, very quickly. I don't know. I think there's still a kind of denial that even the U.S. likes to deny the potential power, I think, of the BRICS, economic power, maybe moral power, in other senses, but the U.S. at least is truly multicultural, truly international as a country. So to work with people of all different colors and races is not a big deal. It's been something that the U.S. has been used to doing for a very long time. But I think for the Europeans, these are the little black and brown men who they used to dominate and run their colonies. So I think maybe that idea is dying even in Europe, but it's still beneath the surface. I think in some ways.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but
Yeah. Thank you so much, Graham, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
my pleasure, Nima. Good.
See you
Khuda.
soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.